Francisco and London. In 2023, Singapore has managed to position itself as the world's third most significant global financial center, remaining only behind New York City and London, and outclassing every other city to be Asia's leading center of finance in the 21st century. This is all what makes Singapore among the most overpowered countries relative to its physical and population sizes anywhere in the world. But it wasn't always like this for Singapore, and Singapore's current gigantic outsized economic power and influence is in fact only a very recent phenomenon, and it was never guaranteed to have turned out this way. Only 20 years ago, back in 2004, the Singaporean GDP per capita was only half of what it currently is today. And just a little further back in history to the country's independence in 1965, only 60 years ago, the country was deeply impoverished and its GDP per capita was even lower than contemporary countries like Jordan and South Africa, that both remain relatively poor today. Back then, just 60 years ago, Singapore's GDP per capita stood at only a paltry $511. The country's unemployment rate stood at a high 14% of the labor force, half of the population was considered to be illiterate, 70% of the population lived in hopelessly overcrowded conditions, and around a third of the population were squatting in slums. Singapore had zero natural resources of any kind to offer and had zero natural freshwater resources to sustain its population of what at the time stood at about 1.86 billion people. But yet, despite these humble origins after independence, in only the 60 years of history since that time, within the span of a single human lifetime, Singapore went from those unlikely beginnings to becoming one of the most fabulously wealthy, successful, influential, and developed megacities on the planet. And it transformed itself into what I would argue is the most overpowered country relative to its physical size located in the whole of Asia, if not the entire world. And in order to understand how Singapore got to where it is today and how it managed to pull off what's arguably the most radical societal transformation ever seen in human history within a single person's lifetime, we have to go back a bit further into history and then build back up to the present. For most of human history, the island of Singapore was basically a sparsely populated village until its geographic potential was realized by Sir Stamford Raffles, a colonial official of the British Empire. He managed to secure control over Singapore in 1819 and turned it into a British colony, and into what is known as an entrepot, an intermediary port where goods are brought to from elsewhere in order to be collected and shipped off somewhere else. Raffles and the British both understood Singapore's strategically valuable location directly along the Strait of Malacca, the shortest maritime trade route between China in the east and India and Europe further to the west. Singapore was built up as a free port by the British during the colonial era, meaning that there were no taxes or customs duties imposed on ships and merchants doing business there, which